3 minutes after 10 is the time. Actually, almost toss a coin, couldn't we? On which side of the Atlantic we should start on. There's bizarre wheels turning. I think we'll start on this side, but we will probably talk about the return, or he never really went away, did he, of Donald Trump. And do you know what interests me? It's the psychological reward that you get for supporting him. I think perhaps that's what many people find hardest to understand. So we may have a look at that. But I'm going to begin with the Conservative government in this country. And yesterday we tried to unravel a couple of questions, and I confined the conversation to historic supporters of the Conservative Party, people who can't quite believe that they are almost certainly not going to vote for them this time round. I'm not doing that today. Today I want everybody to get involved because, and the question, I'm afraid, is going to be a very, what's the word I'm looking for? A simplistic question, a very simple question, which will be, by the time I get to the end of this introduction, which is never guaranteed, of course, by the time I get to the end of this introduction, that question will be a variation on the what are they actually playing at position. What are they actually playing at? It is fascinating. I appreciate not everybody is as obsessed with the ebb and flow of politics as I am, but my job, of course, is to make you interested in where we are, even if you're not at the minute. And I shall do my best to do that. A couple of things picking up from where we left off yesterday. Even the Daily Mail today is asking who paid for this poll in the Daily Telegraph. We talk about a circular firing squad. Somebody whose identity you are not allowed to know commissioned polling to the tune of about £70,000. It's someone who is allied with David Frost, arguably the most ridiculous figure to strut upon the stage of politics in the last 10 years. And there's a lot of competition for that position. Remember, Liz Truss became Prime Minister, but David Frost, for my money, is right up there as one of the most truly ridiculous individuals to engage in politics in the last 10 years. Somebody who is in cahoots with him paid £70,000 to commission polling carefully calibrated to scare the Tories into lurching further to the right. Yesterday, I think we wasted 10 minutes wondering what that meant. It only refers to immigration. It only refers to immigration. And the thing that I find extraordinary is the failure of any of these people to realise that in political terms that is a bottomless pit. A lot of people talk about the Faragification of the Tory party. Some of us have written about it at great length in a best-selling book, still available in all good bookshops. But what they don't understand is that Farage is not a politician in any conventional sense. A bit like Trump, I suppose, in a way. They're hecklers. The problem is, of course, that when a heckler gets onto the stage, who are they supposed to throw their rotten tomatoes at? So immigration is a bottomless pit. Imagine for a moment, and I mean this, imagine that the last of the so-called small boats had already sailed. Okay? Imagine that perceived problem was now over. It is finished. Rishi Sunak can go on the television for the next 6 months and state, with no fear of being contradicted, he can state that he has stopped the boats. Right? I don't think that would make the blindest bit of difference to the political calculus of the next general election. I could be wrong. I'm tempted to ask you whether you do, but that might be a bit too nebulous and theoretical for a phone-in. Let's stick it up there, 7 minutes after 10. If he actually stopped the boats today, would that make the blindest bit of difference to the next general election? 0345 6060 973. And the reason why I don't think it would is not an opinion, it's actually counting. Can you remember what the numbers are? So net migration at the moment into this country last year was 745,000. Now, some people are supremely untroubled by that. Some people care about literally nothing else. Most people sit somewhere between the two positions. Obviously, if 10 million people or 5 million people a year were coming here and there were no jobs or houses for them, then we'd have a huge problem. Some people think that the figure of 745,000 already fits that category, and some people don't want any foreigners ever to come here ever again. And they currently, of course, enjoy rather more prominence in the Parliamentary Conservative Party than they have done since Enoch Powell was chucked out of the cabinet. So 745,000 people made their way to this country last year. How many people do you think came by small boats? 29,090. So, unless there is something rather huge that I am missing here, if the problem that you have is with the scale of immigration, then even if the last small boat has sailed, you've still got a 745,000 person strong problem. Now, if you want to play the card of claiming or pointing out the distinction, the supposed distinction between legal and illegal, then you find yourself in very tricky territory. Because of those 29,090 people coming here in small boats, proportionately, they are going to be considerably more likely to have bona fide claims for asylum than pretty much any other cohort of people making their way here. So you can say that they are illegal in the sense that their mode of transport is illegal, but you can't call a human being illegal. There's no such thing as an illegal human being, which is why we have an asylum system. So you're trying to stop, what they're trying to do is stop genuine refugees and asylum seekers from making their way to this country by essentially pretending that there is no such thing, that they're all bogus. Now, the logic behind that is grim, isn't it? Because they must believe it themselves. This is where, again, I feel the sort of ghost of Donald Trump sitting on my shoulder. I don't know what Donald Trump believes. I don't think he is allied with the views that he sells to his followers. But I think this generation of Tories are. I think that your 30p Lees and your Miriam Cateses and these so-called, all these five families, I honestly think that they have, something got let out of the bottle, didn't it, in 2016? Do you remember the morning after the referendum result when the Sun ran stories about now we won't have to put up with any more Polish shops, and then they backtracked furiously. They'd spent months, if not years, leading up to that referendum vote, claiming it had nothing to do with racism and that Britain was a wonderful, diverse country where everyone was proud to live in, but you have to have limits or you have to have caps or you have to have control. The extraordinary outpouring of hatred that followed, both on a public level and a private and personal level, was absolutely chilling. The calls we took from people telling us that their own mother-in-laws had voted to send all the immigrants home, and you'd say, well, like that, I'm one of them. And they'd say, do you remember, all together now? Oh, I don't mean you. And I used to think that this was confined to a gristly rump of the electorate. But actually, the Tory party must have been full of this all along. The Tory party, particularly post-2019, but even post-2016 and pre-2016, the Tory party must have been full of people that looked at Farage and felt envy, that looked at Farage and said, God, I wish I could tell those lies about people speaking foreign languages. I wish I could pretend to be discomforted by people speaking foreign languages on trains when my own children speak a foreign language to my own wife when I go home. I wish I could pretend not to understand what the statistics about children who have English as a second language in schools actually mean. Well, they must have been watching it thinking, I wish I could tell xenophobic lies, but I can't. In David Cameron's Conservative Party, you couldn't tell xenophobic lies. In Theresa May's, you kind of could. I know she's engaged in a sort of rehabilitation at the moment, and of the last four, she's by far the least awful. Last 4 or 5, hang on. Cameron, May. Do you get Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak? So May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak. Yeah, of the last 4, I won't include Cameron in that at the moment. She's by far the most awful, the least awful. I think stop the boats means stop the foreigners. Okay, and that is why I think 745,000 versus 29,090 means that this political calculation makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me. If you're appealing to a constituency of people that don't like immigration, then how will pledging to deal with, and probably failing, 29,090 out of almost 1 million people, how will that make any difference at all? So if Rishi Sunak somehow arrives at a place where he can stand up every day for the next God knows how many months and say, I stopped the boats, what difference is that going to make? And if I'm right, and it's not going to make any difference at all, then what are they playing at? 0345 6060 You've got 60 MPs today, including the deputy chairman, although there's about 50 of them, so the title doesn't carry the cachet it once did, threatening to vote against the government's bill or not to support the government's bill because they don't think it's nasty enough. They don't think that, international law is important. They seem to be ignoring two things. If they want to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, then they are ignoring the damage that does immediately to the Good Friday Agreement. They're ignoring the fact that we're automatically out of the European Council, which is quite a significant step, given that it would put us on the same ethical and foreign policy footing as Russia and Belarus. We are ignoring completely the fact that the Rwandan government have said if you pull out of that convention, then we won't take anybody from your country. And everybody's ignoring the fact that since this so-called deal was signed with the Rwandan government, 6 asylum seekers from Rwanda have had their applications accepted in the United Kingdom. So I assemble all of that evidence. Those are all facts. Everything I've just said to you is a fact, not an opinion. The numbers are facts. The asylum seekers coming here from Rwanda are facts. The Good Friday agreements, absolute reliance upon the European Convention on Human Rights is a fact. The Rwandan government's expressed insistence, of course they might change their mind, but their expressed insistence on not taking anybody from this country if we withdraw from the European Convention of Human Rights is a fact. All of these things are facts. And yet Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party is embarked upon a sort of fantasy island, hinging, and this is the bit I really don't get, hinging upon the idea that making everybody cross and frightened about immigration creates an atmosphere in which stopping the boats becomes an electoral jackpot. What are they doing? Are they just hoping that nobody will point out that 745,000, if you've been primed to hate foreigners, if you've been primed to be spooked by immigration, 745,000 coming via legal routes is much more significant than 29,090 coming via hazardous routes. So what genuinely, what are they playing at? I genuinely don't know. I genuinely must stop saying the word genuinely. Genuinely. Because the more I look at it, the less sense it makes. And there's some good commentary in the Times today. Thank goodness. As I mentioned, there are still some decent writers, some very decent writers on that paper. Not least Hugo Rifkind, who makes the point about the numbers. Keen readers, he writes, may notice that one of those numbers is quite a lot bigger than the other one, as in the 745,000 versus 29,090. And then you have Daniel Finkelstein, a former speechwriter for David Cameron, put in the House of Lords, I think, as a consequence of his service. And he actually writes under the headline that could be something from our show. The real problem for the party is a flight from reality, that detachment from reality in 2016, which seems to me to be the perfect launchpad from which to ask this question. What are they actually playing at? So, in conclusion, I promise, this weird poll in the Telegraph, which is big, it asked more people than usual questions and then used quite clever mechanics to extrapolate it into constituencies. There's a couple of flaws in it, beyond the fact that no one knows who paid for it, but it ignores the fact that every single vote going to that party that Farage and his friends run, it's not a party, is it? It's a business masquerading as a political party. I think the leader gets appointed by the board. It's democracy in action, isn't it? And that there's a misconception, and I think a deliberate mislead, that all the people leaning towards those people, towards that party, are disaffected Tory voters. They're clearly not. But the poll has been commissioned in order to push the Tory party to the right, and it's not complicated. That doesn't mean fiscally or economically or ideologically. It just means on immigration. We've got to be even tougher on immigration. And yet they have been tougher rhetorically on immigration than any government I can remember, and they are among the least popular in the polls. So what are they playing at? 0345 6060 973. And how have we arrived in a place where almost the entire political focus of the governing party can be on a deeply flawed and profoundly unpleasant policy that, even if it worked, would not touch the sides of the problem it claims to address? I don't get it. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. So come in on that from any angle you want. The thing that intrigues me the most is whether or not there are any votes up for grabs in return for so-called stopping the boats. I can't see it myself. And they're just throwing more and more energy into this bottomless pit, because if they stop the boats, Farage would be out tomorrow talking about people speaking foreign on trains again. Or he'd be talking about wage compression or how immigrants are stealing our jobs. He's not a proper honest politician. Well, honest politician's a bit of an oxymoron, but he's not a proper contributor to public discourse. He doesn't identify genuine problems that need solutions. He identifies points of division that can serve his own purposes of self-promotion. And yet here we are. Our entire political landscape, it seems today, dedicated to a ludicrous policy designed to address a problem that is, in the great scheme of things, if you're going to compare 29,000 to 745,000, that problem's negligible. 0345 6060 973. What are they playing at? 23 minutes after 10 is the time. So, when you've got senior figures from previous Conservative administrations queuing up to describe the Tory party as being essentially detached from reality, you have to wonder what calculation has led them to the conclusion that making everything about deporting people to Rwanda is the road to redemption. Up to and including this secretly funded poll in the Telegraph yesterday, very clearly designed to push the party even further to the right on this single issue. I don't get it. And I get most of it, I think. Certainly by the time I finish talking to you about it, I do. But I don't get this. John's in Islington. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello.
Well, first of all, the actual figures for immigration, not net migration, are 1.15 million.
Yes, you're right.
Which is an immense figure. And as you've just been saying, net the illegals add up to 2, 3 or 4%, depending on which figures you take. But the Tories, I think they've put a great big bear trap for themselves by conflating the two. Because were they to stop every single boat tomorrow, we'd have 1.1 million people coming in. And they'd just be exposed because, 1.1 illegal migrants, which they sanctioned entrance into this country.
And if you are discomforted by people speaking foreign on trains and sundry other racist tropes, you're not going to know whether or not that person came here by one means or another. It is their foreignness. It is the foreign language they are speaking that discomforts you, despite the fact that, of course, in Nigel Farage's case, that he then goes home to a foreign language speaking family. And so the distinction is meaningless in the context of any even vaguely xenophobic immigration rhetoric.
But I think it's deeply xenophobic because they tried to make people think that if they hear a foreign language, it's probably from an illegal immigrant, whereas in fact, statistically, there's a 3% chance it is. And anyway, it isn't, because they won't be on a train, because they'll be locked up on a boat or somewhere.
That's another brilliant point. So this is, I think, you're going further than Finkelstein. The detachment from reality is actually spectacular.
Yeah,
because the average punter doesn't even see the asylum seeker. Well, I suppose you can gather outside hotels to shout abuse at people living on £5 a week or whatever it is. But if those hotels were all to close, the kind of people minded to go and shout abuse outside them would just move on to something else.
Yes, I think it's
bizarre.
It's bizarre, and it's actually not serving the Tory party, which, in my opinion, is a very good thing.
Yes. So I
They
see.
will-
So you want them to fall headfirst into this bear trap in their own minds. What are they playing at?
I don't know.
No.
I don't understand political fetishes. I mean, each country has its own little political fetish.
Yes, it
and they
does.
have fetishized this. And I don't understand Rwanda anyway, because if they can only export 200 or 500 a year, if I was sitting waiting to get in a little boat to come across, I'd wait till the 500 clocked up. Think, well, that's all right. This year I'm off.
It is, yes. Well, then the question remains, albeit that it is now enforced by your observations and your contributions. Thank you, John. What are they playing at? How do they arrive at the conclusion that the path to increased popularity, the path to a better performance at the general election, is to focus almost exclusively on, as John described it, 3 to 4% of the immigrant population, while crossing your fingers and hoping? Well, I don't know. I do not know. I think part of the answer, because we can't keep spinning around, I think part of the answer is that the politicians are now cut from the same cloth as the kind of people that cynical, xenophobic politicians used to appeal to. So they would hold their nose while appealing to poorly educated, easily provoked people. Whereas now you've got poorly educated, easily provoked people, I think, in Parliament. Not even poorly educated, actually. Scratch that. That sounds snobbish. I mean bigoted. You've got bigoted people, regardless of what their education levels are. Bigoted people in Parliament. So they don't need to hold their nose to appeal or to excite other people's bigotries because they've got them themselves. Not mentioning any names, but it's pretty obvious, isn't it? James is in Southampton. What are they playing at?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Nice to speak to you. First of all, I'm just going to come over and say I'm one of your former Conservatives.
Okay.
I'm only late 30s, so that doesn't leave many elections.
No.
I certainly won't be voting from this time round, and won't be again until they veer back towards the centre ground. So,
And yet the intent this week's clearly to steer them even further away from it. So why? What are they playing at?
And, well, I mean, just to add on that, I find it really bizarre that they're losing probably many, many voters like me.
Yes.
And they're doing exactly the opposite of the things they should be doing to keep hold of us. But to go on to your question, I think it's to absolve themselves of any blame, because the rhetoric I sort of read online and the comments that follow it, I know you said you have great fun reading certain comment pages.
Yes.
People just come out with the classic, oh, well, the immigrants are to blame for X, Y, and Z. And well, actually, as I said to your researcher, your producer, for decades and decades, since the end of the Second World War, immigrants have come into this country, helped rebuild, helped contribute to society, helped diversify society, contributed to our economy.
So
the only people to blame are the government for misspending the money that...
Well, I can't see a doctor. It's all the fault of the immigrants. And of course, then if he announces that he's stopped the boats and you still can't see a doctor, he's made his own situation worse. Daniel Finkelstein writes about you this morning. Not you personally, James, in Southampton. That would be weird.
Damn.
But he just says if leaving the European Convention on Human Rights would lose voters from the centre of the party, split the Tories, undermine the country's international standing and the rule of law, and still not satisfy the people they're trying to woo, the people even further to the right. It is bizarre, isn't it? So you're being abandoned in favour of people who they are probably not going to be able to impress because they're part of the Farage bottomless pit constituency. If you stop the boats tomorrow, we'll be talking about children speaking foreign in schools again on Friday.
I mean, my daughter will be going to school in 2 years, and I couldn't give two hoots if...
Oh, you should do. But you should do because it's been proven that children who speak more than one language are better equipped to deal with academic life, and that's to the benefit of everybody in the classroom. But of course, it was the first time I met Farage, I think, when he was wanging on about that, and that is where we are now. If you invent dragons to slay and swear that you're the person to slay them, what do you do when the dragon disappears? 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts, how's your headline? 10:34 is the time. I pointed out yesterday, 14,000 care home beds disappeared as care homes close. Housing being an urgent issue as well. And as we discussed yesterday, quite harrowing conversations about the difficulty of getting hold of medicines, increasing shortage of medicines. Some linked to global issues, some unfortunately linked very specifically to British/Brexit issues. There are some major problems facing the country, and the governing party seems to be dedicating almost all of its energy to the plan to deport at the most a few hundred people to a country so unsafe that we accept asylum applications from it as a response to overall migration figures being in excess of 1 million. And I genuinely don't understand it. Although perhaps I do. Perhaps I'm being a bit hard on myself. This is plain and simple white supremacy, says Mark. The Tory party has always had a core of racist members and supporters. By demonising small boat migrants, it's the thin end of the wedge. They can then magnify to all migrants and children of migrants. The reason is to punch down so that the white working and middle classes will scapegoat migrants for the fall in living standards and not blame 14 years of Tory misrule. As a person of colour, I've seen variations on this tune for my whole life. Alex in Hove says the extreme right accept they have lost the election and are planning to replace Sunak with one of their own. The mess is so bad they believe Labour cannot mend things, will become unpopular and let them in to power at the next election. And James writes, the Tory politicians that are pushing this are not focused on winning the general election. They are only focused on winning their own seats and saving their own skin. As for Sunak, he is simply a hostage to them. I think they're all slightly more or considerably more intelligent analyses than I've managed to provide you with this morning. I'll leave you. I'll just throw one other thing into the mix, because as soon as you read the words that I think it was Mark wrote about plain and simple white supremacy, you think, well, hang on, some of the politicians pushing this hardest are not white. And this is a voter in Iowa where the Vivek Ramaswamy candidate took a right old kicking in the Iowa caucus overnight. And he had been appealing pretty heavily to what you could probably describe as an anti-black perspective, despite himself being of Asian heritage. And one of the voters, quoted by some journalist covering that caucus, said this: "I'm not being prejudiced, guys, but I don't like his name. I don't like where he came from. After 9/11, I still harbour a lot of hard feelings." So a lesson there, perhaps, in how an ethnic minority politician can bend over backwards to accommodate and woo racist voters, but ultimately, when push comes to to shove, if it's a racist voter you're wooing, then eventually their racism will turn its attention to you. 10:38 is the time. Pamela's in Wyndham. Pamela, what are they playing at?
I think they're all trying to bolster Sunak. I think Sunak has to get his 5 pledges. He made 5 pledges and he's desperate to get them done so that he can go to the country and say, I've done this. And I think the team around him, the deputy chair of their parties, whatever, I think they are trying to help him by pushing, oh, yes, we can't agree with you, but in the end they will say, oh, yes, you've convinced me, you're a strong leader, we capitulate. I think that's what they're up to.
This is the polar opposite analysis to the one that says they're already jockeying for the post-election defeat positions, isn't it? Because
I think they still think that they might be able to win if they get Sunak's popularity back up to where it was.
Well, it's their only chance. Unless they get rid of him, they can only win if he is more popular come election day than he is now.
I think that's what they're trying to do.
Well, you will be proved right or wrong much more quickly than anybody else today, because when this vote goes ahead, if they do vote against him, if people like 30p Lee vote, then your theory falls apart in real time.
I hope so.
Doesn't it? Yes, because I disagree. I think they're fighting like rats in a sack now. I think that they're, Kemi Badenoch, I think she leaked something and claimed it was a mistake about Liz Truss trying to sell weapons to China. I haven't got fully across that story, but they all seem to hate each other almost as much as they hate foreigners.
Yeah, but they're desperate to win the election, aren't they?
I don't know. That's probably why I'm so confused. I find the claim that they are. That they've accepted defeat and are now mobilising for different reasons. I find that more compelling at the moment, Pamela, than yours. Not least because Sunak seemed to acknowledge it himself, I think, in front of the 1922 yesterday, it would have been yesterday, wouldn't it, when he was talking about how I intend to win this election. And also, what does it say about our democracy that someone with 70 grand to spend can just drop it on a poll that the Daily Telegraph then stick on the front page And we need a name for David Frost, don't we? We need a name for David Frost. I know it's tempting because his name begins with F, but Ofcom is quite strict about that sort of thing. You drop £70,000 anonymously on a poll designed to encourage the Tory party to lurch further to the right. You sign up Frost to sort of cheerlead for you, also in the pages of the Daily Telegraph, and none of us know who's paid for it. We are a funny old bunch. 10:40 is the time. What are they playing at? And we don't know, is the answer so far. Pamela putting another cat among the pigeons with a suggestion that they're now sort of embarked upon an attempt to make it look as if Sunak's going to lose, and then they'll all fall into place in the nick of time and make him look strong and effective. I'm not putting any money on that one. Rob's on Churnside, in Churnside. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hi, from a totally blind socialist who ran away from England after the last election thinking Scotland was far enough, and now I'm going to move to the Shetlands. I like to say...
Where are you going to end up? In Denmark, are you? Where are you going to end up?
No, Shetland's fine, because it's a lovely place, lovely people, been up there, and they vote me as opened armed, invited me as my wife as a disabled person, and we think we'll love the place. I think these people are actually more intelligent than everybody's given them credit for.
Go on.
I'm originally from Liverpool, and I go back there recently. My wife's from Newcastle, and we also go back there very regularly. There are lots of people under 21 who've never voted. That 25%, that don't vote in any election, they're mainly younger people who are poor people. They'll never have a mortgage. They're on benefits, they're on low income. They're being told two things. One, these boat people, which is a horrendous term, by the way.
Well, it's better than illegals.
Yeah, but they're blamed.
It's working with the constituency you're describing.
Yeah, they're invading. Right. They're invading our country. And the second thing is, which has not been mentioned today, is that obviously the right-wingers are offering £20,000 without tax as well. And these two policies are what are being sold to people in Liverpool.
What do you mean the £20,000 without tax? Do you mean the tax thresholds?
Yes, the tax threshold to be raised to 20 grand.
Okay.
That's what Farage and his people... Yeah, but they're the two things that are getting across. These people never get asked what they think in surveys. They don't come on phone-ins. Huge...
They do, to be fair, and they will be asked what they think in surveys, because that's where 10% support for the whatever they call the replace party is... That's where it's hovering. But hang on, if they're so clever... Because we're talking about the Tories today... If the boats don't stop and they have persuaded people that the boats are a major threat to their livelihood or welfare, and they're too busy or too distracted to point out that 745,000 people coming via traditional routes is a much, much bigger figure than 29,090. Where's the electoral win in that? They haven't solved the problem that they've created, and they've completely ignored a considerably bigger problem that the people you're describing could be equally exercised by.
But the point is, the people I'm describing don't get the figures that you're saying, James.
No, that doesn't matter, though. So we can forget about the figures and focus upon the boats. If the boats don't stop, then Sunak loses twice. How is that clever? How is it a clever policy to focus on this?
I do agree with you, James.
Right.
It doesn't for the Conservatives, but it works for the right. I don't mean the Conservative Party. I think it works for part of the Conservative Party and where some of them may end up, which is further
so
right.
Post-election loss, boats still sailing. Labour might reopen safe and legal routes, which would get rid of the problem of the boats more or less overnight. It would certainly decimate the problem. And then the sort of politicians that you're describing, who are interchangeable with the sort of Farage Easter constituency, they would... I can't see it. So what would they do then? They
would then the rest of this 745,000, which both me and you understand the breakdown, 300,000 or 400,000 are students, others are workers who we want
got Hong
in
Kong
the country.
Hong Kong and Ukraine refugees as well, of course.
But they will still turn on them, James. They will turn on them in the end.
I know that.
This is an easy,
No, but that's it. You're trying to have your cake and eat it. Because I know you're right. The second bit you said is right, but that doesn't make the first bit you said correct about them being really clever, and this actually makes sense. So going all in on the boats is a loss. Whoever you are, if you're a member of the Tory party, going all in on the boats is a stupid thing to do. Full stop.
I'm afraid I still don't have your faith that people will believe
No,
they're
but even
not
if you
being
do,
invaded.
even if this is a significant constituency of people that really do think that their vote is linked to the small boats, they're not going to fix it. So they're not going to win any votes. And if you've said it yourself, if the small boats stop tomorrow, they'll start getting cross about another kind of immigrants. So that vote, the Tories are never going to win that vote.
Well, they've got as far as they have now, having these policies in place and won elections with these policies in place, or some of them, I believe, anyway.
We're talking very specifically about the so-called small boats and the mystery, really, of why they've bet the farm on it. And the mystery's getting bigger, really, as the conversation continues. And I wonder what I need to do. Thank you, Rob, and good luck in the Shetlands. That's an absolutely beautiful part of the world, although I have to say a lot of my knowledge of it is based upon Anne Cleeves' novels, as opposed to actual first-hand experience. I love Anne Cleeves' novels. How can I get people to share my misgivings about the idea of some rich bloke, almost certainly the kind of bloke who funds a so-called think tank, a lobby group masquerading as a think tank? They've started setting up TV stations now as well. I'm pretty sure one of the people who helped set up one of these weird TV stations actually has a think tank, actually funds. At least it's not secretly funded, I suppose, in that case. But how can I get people to share my misgivings about someone being able to spend 70 grand on an opinion poll that is designed to reset the course for the governing party without anybody knowing who it is? I just don't think that's very democratic. I'm beginning to think we never took back control at all. It's 10 to 11 already. Okay, try this one on for size. Quite a lot of you are making this point. Wavy Davy perhaps puts it best. As a born and bred northeast truck driver, works with lots of people who have a huge problem with migrants. Even if the boats don't stop, it's still a win because the alternative is fear. They believe Labour will make things much worse. So there would be no small boats problem were it not for Conservative policies. They create a problem. They turn it into one of the biggest deals in political discourse, despite the fact that the numbers are negligible in the broader context of immigration in general. And they keep insisting that we could fix it if only that pesky Labour Party would let us. That's the theory. And it fits some of the facts. None of the theories fit all of the facts so far, do they? None of the facts fit all of the theories. But there we are. What are they playing at? Sometimes these are the best questions to ask, aren't they? It's a variation on the Marvin Gaye, isn't it? What's going on? But what are they playing at? What are they playing at? 10:51 is the time. Luke's in Salisbury. Luke, what would you like to say?
Hi. So I think the idea that the Tories kind of need to stop the boats is a little bit wrong. I think they can't stop the boats because they created it as a scapegoat, and that's why the problem's been perpetuated.
But then you've got, sorry to interrupt, but then you've got the problem of the 60 odd MPs who I do honestly think are dedicated to in my view, the rather stupid idea that if only things were even nastier, then we would stop the boats. Do you see what I mean?
I think it's performative. I think the more you look like you're trying to punish those people in those boats, which is really what this hard right demographic wants, the more that you don't have to solve the problem. You can just look like you're taking the hardest line on it, and those people will continue to vote for you, even though Labour could solve the problem.
Well, then why are they tearing each other apart then? Why are they tearing each other apart then? You've got 30p lead telling...
There's pressure from the further right, isn't there? Groups like Reform slowly trying to shift the Overton window in the UK and force political discourse further to the right.
I mean, you'd have to be in a constituency where they had a chance of winning a seat, and there are currently precisely 0 constituencies in that category.
I suppose perhaps, but just taking votes off the Tories in every constituency is going to make them lose swing seats.
I mean, this is where we ended up yesterday, albeit that we were asking a different question. The calculation, and I don't think Rishi Sunak bizarrely has made this calculation, is that we have abandoned the centre ground. We are not going to win back what might be loosely described as centre-right voters. Therefore, in order to minimise the damage done at the next general election, the voters we need to woo are the ones that are either that are further to the right of where we were in 2019, but who are either not going to vote at all, which I think is probably the most significant constituency, actually, significant category, or who are going to vote for a sort of weird vanity project party like Replace or Reform or whatever they're called. And that is it. I mean, we're sitting here overcomplicating things, trying to work out the arithmetic and the ebb and flow of political rhetoric. The bottom line is we can't win back sensible Tories. Even the ones who voted for Brexit now realise that was stupid. We've lost them completely. Therefore, the only people we can pursue are the knuckleheads.
Precisely, yeah. Yeah.
And that's why I've made 30p Lee deputy chairman of the party, the patron saint of knuckleheads. It could be that.
I think the corruption, the breaking international law, all of that. I think they've lost the centre ground to Labour, and they've realised that if they want to hold on to any of their core vote shit, they're going to have to swing to the right and make sure that reform
only on immigration, because there's nothing else to swing to the right on, really. That could be it. We've only got the knuckleheads to play for. There's nobody else left. So this is why I do like the phone-ins. Thank you, Luke. Great stuff. I do like the phone-ins, albeit that we're not doing one today, where I confine contributions to people who see themselves as, if not quite dyed in the wool, then certainly as committed Tory voters. And we've spoken to quite a lot, haven't we, over the last year or so. I think probably the loneliest place to be in British politics at the moment, especially if you've got a small case of footballification. So albeit that you're thoughtful, open-minded and sensible, you still can't quite conceive of voting in a direction other than the one defined by the scarf around your neck, whether it's blue or red or yellow or green or whatever it may be. Even as yours are awful, you can still cling to the notion that the other lot would be worse. But even if you're suffering from a small case of footballification, this must be such a lonely place to be. The party of 30p Lee and Miriam Cates and Suella Braverman and Jonathan Gullis. In the space of a decade, the party of Ken Clarke, Michael Heseltine, Dominic Grieve, David Gauke. In the space of a decade. It's extraordinary, isn't it? The party of Michael Heseltine has become the party of 30p Lee. How can anybody support both of those iterations? How can anybody be as passionate about, I say 2010 Tories as they are about 2024 Tories? You can't be. They're completely different beasts. And here we are. 10:56 is the time. Patrick's in Reading. Patrick, what do you reckon?
So how are you, James?
Very well, thank you. What's on your mind?
So I think we're looking at the Stop the Boats policy slightly incorrectly.
Yeah.
Now, I think we should be looking at it similar to the pledge that Sunak made around inflation. So inflation was always going to come down, and he claimed credit for it and is doing a, albeit muted, lap of honour about that.
Yes.
I think the process that the Conservatives are going through prior to an election is get the Rwanda policy through. Even if one person isn't on a plane sent to Rwanda, I think the immigration numbers are naturally going to come down anyway.
Yeah, but the pledge says stop the boats.
Well, I don't think that matters, because I think
that's
it's
the
more
pledge.
But I understand that, but the immigration is the issue. So.
No, I am actually going to disagree with you, because this would be quite a clever move if they. I mean, did he pledge? What did he pledge to do with immigration in general? Was there a pledge about immigration in general, or was there just a pledge about boats?
I think it was a case of saying stop the boats, and then he always talks about the deterrent. So if the deterrent is there, I believe he can connect that to Ukraine numbers coming down, the people from Hong Kong coming and not being the foreign student element.
No, it's not there. It's not there. So, I mean, you'd be right if the pledge was, we will reduce. He should have done with immigration what he's done with inflation. He should have just bet on gravity. So unless there's another Hong Kong or another Ukraine, the numbers next year or the year after, but that's not in time for the election, though, Patrick. So that's another fly in the ointment of your theory.
Wouldn't they have to announce the net migration number? Isn't it done per quarter?
But that doesn't matter, does it? Because he hasn't pledged to bring down net migration. He's pledged to stop the boats. The 5 pledges: halving inflation, growing the economy, debt falling, waiting list falling, and small boats stopping. So if it had simply been a pledge to reduce immigration, it would not be looking stupid today. And you'd be right.
I agree that the language that he has said is stop the boats, but I think it translates to a Tory voter to immigration coming down.
I don't think it does. I mean, I could be wrong. We all could, of course, but I don't understand why they'd put it all. They bet the house on the small boats, on 29,090 out of a total in excess of 1 million. It doesn't make sense. And even if he stops the boats, he's still got the other problem, even if it halves. You know, it's like Goneril and Regan, isn't it, in that scene in King Lear when they're trying to strip him of his soldiers. And they go from 100, you can have 100, actually no, you can't have 100. Right, well, I'll go to your sister then. Well, you can't have 100 soldiers with me either, I'm afraid. You can have 50, and then it's down to 20 and 10 and 5, and in the end, one of them, and I can never remember which one, Goneril or Regan, just says, well, what needs one? Why do you need any soldiers at all? It's the same with immigration. The Tory party now seems to be in the grip of people who don't want any. These amendments that have been put forward are hideous. Don't want any, really, asylum seekers coming here. And there we go. And I'm as baffled now as to why they're doing this in the way that they're doing it as I was at 10 o'clock. 3 minutes after 11. We had a really good conversation yesterday, if that's the right word to use, which it probably isn't, but it's the one I've used now, about this escalation in the Red Sea. They didn't work, did they? Rishi Sunak, shortly before he stood up in the House of Commons yesterday to talk for the first time to MPs about the decision to launch bombing campaigns in conjunction with America in northern Yemen, shortly before he did it, it was announced that they had taken a shot at another US ship, the US Laboon, a destroyer. And the airstrikes last week had clearly not worked. So Sunak at the same time was saying it was a limited single action, and yet it would appear that it was both successful and unsuccessful, as in the targets that they were aiming for were hit. But it has not really stopped. Well, it has not stopped the attack upon vessels in that channel. It's an amazing channel, you know. I don't want to sound... Listen, let's go a little bit off piste first. And we had a caller yesterday who talked about how ships would have to go back down around the Cape of Good Hope. They already are. It's a detour of between 7 and 20 days, which, you know, doesn't sound like a lot, does it? But the fast... You know how I love bridges and cranes? Canals are mad. You know, I love bridges and cranes. There's something about the way that they speak to man's dominion over nature. Think what a bridge does, you know? Do you know they think that it's probably apocryphal, but there is a chance that Caesar didn't cross the Thames until he got to Brentford. I don't know how well you know London, but Brentford is a long way from the Thames estuary. But there was no way to get over the Thames until he got to Brentford, where the river is forded. Still is. That's how it got its name, Brent Ford, see? And a bridge does incredible... I mean, I know I sound a bit weird, a bit like that Paul Whitehouse character on The Fast Track. It's amazing. But it just is. You've got to stop sometimes to take in the wonders of the world. And some of the wonders are man-made. Bridges, in particular, just speak of our ability not to tame nature, but to almost harness it. And... canals are the same. I don't know if you've ever seen a really important canal. I've been to Corinth. Corinth Canal is incredible. When you look at a map of Greece, the sort of alternative to the Corinth Canal, which basically involved, I think, were they Dutch engineers back end of the 19th century? Just smashed their way through rock to create a passage that allowed ships to go through in the nick of time, compared to having to sail all the way around the bottom of the Peloponnese. And the Red Sea coupled with the Suez Canal is like that times 100. $1 trillion worth, they reckon, of trade passes through there each year. I don't even know how many noughts there are on $1 trillion. Do you? How many noughts are there? I have no idea, but it's a very big number. And the the mess of the Middle East, I thought came into focus yesterday, actually, when we were discussing this. So I looked into it a little deeper after we finished our conversation yesterday. And I came across the original comments by Rishi Sunak and comments that were added to yesterday. I want you to listen to them, okay, first, before I tell you why I thought they were interesting and at the same time odd.
I can tell the House today that our initial assessment is that all 13 planned targets were destroyed. We have seen no evidence thus far of civilian casualties, which we took great care to avoid. Mr. Speaker, I do not take decisions on the use of force lightly. That's why I stress that this action was taken in self-defence. It was limited, not escalatory. It was a necessary and proportionate response to a direct threat to UK vessels and therefore to the UK itself. Mr. Speaker, we shouldn't fall for their malign narrative that this is about Israel and Gaza. They target ships from around the world. We continue to work towards a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza and to get more aid to civilians. We also continue to support a negotiated settlement in Yemen's civil war. But I want to be very clear that this action is completely unrelated to those issues. It is a direct response to the Houthis' attacks on international shipping.
Well, listen, you don't like living in a country where you think that the Prime Minister might be lying, but we have done for a long time now, and hopefully we won't do for much longer. But I don't believe him. I don't quite see, unless I'm not fully following his logic, I don't quite see how you can claim that the strikes were completely unrelated to the Israel-Gaza conflict. The Houthis are, like a lot of Islamist terror groups, dedicated to the destruction of Israel. They have it in what passes for their charter. I forget the exact words. I think they've even got the word Jews in there. So, their existence in part is linked to the existence of the other issues in the Middle East. The idea that the deliberate targeting of Israel's two biggest international allies in this part of the world has nothing to do with what Israel is currently doing to Gaza doesn't make sense to me. And I want to know whether it makes sense to you. Let me also remind you, if you haven't heard already, that Hamas released a video yesterday, which I think was hideous in both its inception and its execution of a hostage who was sort of, well, she had to announce the deaths. They almost did it like a cliffhanger. It was quite disgusting. One hostage being forced to announce the death of two fellow Israeli hostages. Hamas continues to push the envelope of performative barbarism, while Israel, of course, continues to kill Palestinians in Gaza on a scale that is becoming close to unimaginable. So, I mean, there are two questions here. The first is, do you agree with or believe Rishi Sunak when he says that the UK-US strikes were completely unrelated to the Israel-Gaza conflict? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And then the second question, I suppose it depends on what your answer to the first question is. But the second question is why? Why does he do? Why does he feel the need to stress or to claim, depending on whether you believe him or not? Why does he feel the need to stress or to claim that the strikes on Houthis were completely unrelated to the Israel-Gaza conflict? I mean, he's right that there are other attacks on other ships and that they happen sporadically. There's piracy in that part of the world. One of my callers yesterday referred you to the Tom Hanks film, which covers the issue. But the question of why he would want to stress and or claim that UK-US strikes on Houthi positions, and the Houthis are a pretty hideous bunch, by the way, but they're fighting a civil war in Yemen with people who are backed by Saudi Arabia, and I don't know whether ironic is quite the right word to use, but the kind of weapons that have been deployed against them by the Yemeni government are precisely the kind of weapons that the UK used during last week's airstrikes. Typhoon fighter jets, Paveway 4 bombs. And again, if you don't know, Yemen has a sort of mountainous north. It's not unlike the Hindu Kush, so it's easy for them to hide out there. But the war itself, the civil war itself, has killed about 150,000 people directly, and about 227,000, it is estimated, are dead from famine and disease. So it's a hellhole by any stretch of the imagination. And the Houthis are very much, it's not quite a Sunni Shia conflict, this actually, in the sense that some other sectarian divisions in the Middle East are. It's a little bit more complicated than that, with the Houthis prepared to sort of make alliances according to their own self-interest. It's not as sectarian as other conflicts in the area have been. But the one thing you can say with absolute certainty is that the Houthis act in full support, if you like, of Palestinians in Gaza, and in full rejection of the modern state of Israel's right to exist, which is a disgusting position to adopt by any reasonable measure. What I want is an answer to the question of why Sunak would claim that the strikes were completely unrelated to the Israel-Gaza conflict, when, to me, from where I'm sitting, they are absolutely inextricable. It's one of those days, isn't it? I talked to you yesterday, and thank you for the kind words about it. It's important to admit occasionally that you're not qualified to have a strong opinion. And on the question of whether or not we should be dropping more bombs and firing more missiles in the Middle East, I used the phrase, I'm haunted by past opinions, even though I think if you launch missiles at British ships, then the British government has the right to launch missiles back at you. But we had that conversation yesterday. Today's is different. Today's is about the sort of real politic of the situation. I wasn't aware of anybody thinking that this was somehow a completely independent episode from the atrocities of October the 7th and the subsequent massacre in Gaza. I don't know why the Prime Minister would want to claim that, or why he would believe it. And I want you to tell me. 0345 6060973. Now, you can't, the problem is, there's liars everywhere. So a lot of people say, well, you can't believe that because Hamas said it. But the truth is, well, to coin a cliche, the first casualty of war is truth. So just because the Houthis say that they've been doing it because some ships heading in one direction could be carrying weapons which might be used against Gazans doesn't mean it's true. But Rishi Sunak speaks with certainty about this event. The British missiles being launched at Houthi positions has nothing to do with the Israel-Gaza conflict. And I'm not entirely comfortable. No, I'm not entirely. You can criticise me for this if you want. I'm not entirely comfortable dismissing this out of hand and saying he's lying, because if he is lying or being economical with the actuality, I need to know why. Okay? 0345 6060973. Why would Rishi Sunak say that something that seems to me to be inextricably linked to the situation? You only have to look at the map. So Yemen sits at the bottom of Saudi Arabia, and Israel-Gaza sort of sits at the top of it. And the Red Sea plus the Suez Canal runs right down the side, if you're looking at it from here, right down the side of Saudi Arabia. I would argue that almost anything going on in that part of the world at the moment that involves American or British interests is going to be linked to the situation in Israel-Gaza. But listen, this isn't one of those things where I've got a particularly well-fed dog in the race. You can explain to me why Rishi Sunak's right and this has nothing to do with Israel or Gaza, then I'll bite your arm off. But I also want you to explain to me why, if he's not right, he is so keen to make this point. I'll play you another little short version of the clip so that you know I'm not imagining things. But when I came on air yesterday, it didn't cross my mind that this wasn't linked to the Israel-Hamas war or the Israel bombardment of Gaza. It didn't cross my mind. And then the Prime Minister said this.
We shouldn't fall for their malign narrative that this is about Israel and Gaza. They target ships from around the world. We continue to work towards a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza and to get more aid to civilians. We also continue to support a negotiated settlement in Yemen's civil war. But I want to be very clear that this action is completely unrelated to those issues. It is a direct response to the Houthis' attacks on international shipping.
Is it really? The targeting on a new level, on a previously unprecedented level of the Israeli government's two biggest allies in the West has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that those two countries are the Israeli government's two biggest allies in the West. I don't get it, and I don't think it's true, but I need you to help me out. It's 11:17. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. Seems important to me. I'm not persuaded by the objections to Rishi Sunak taking the decision to take military action in Yemen without consulting Parliament. I could quite possibly be wrong about that, and it's not a pretty precedent. But William Hague's quite strong on the subject in the Times today, and it's worth listening to former foreign secretaries about the detail of some of these issues. But so I say I'm not persuaded that the military action was the wrong thing to do, or indeed B, that the failure to consult Parliament before doing it was the wrong thing to do. That's not what we're talking about today. We talked about that yesterday. I think it's important to establish that, though, given that it's my own pontifications that lead us to the question I am going to ask. Why is the Prime Minister so keen to establish the questionable position that the UK-US strikes were completely unrelated to the Israel-Gaza conflict, when the people responsible for the strikes are adamant that they're intrinsically related? I don't quite get it. Aussie's in Enfield. Aussie, what would you like to say?
No, look, first of all, I'm not defending the Houthis. I don't
that's a
like
relief.
the Houthis, but the problem here is they're hiding the unintended consequence.
Right.
Regardless of what's going on, the world is, with the exception of South Africa, sitting on its hands inverted, while thousands and thousands of people are being bombed into the dark ages. And,
yes.
Sooner or later that's got to stop. And then you've got, extreme groups that see an opportunity to make a point by blocking the seaways. And of course we can't allow that to happen. But let's be honest about it. It is about money. It is about keeping those sea lanes open. And let's not be reductivist. It's not just about money. It's about medicine. It's about standard of living. It's about lots and lots. It's not just about people getting wealthy or people receiving money. These shipping lanes, these trade routes are the blood that keeps the body politic alive, to be honest. I don't want to sort of sound like some sort of undergraduate socialist blaming it all on capitalism. And I grant you that it's hard to argue that it's more important than people dying, because it's not more important than people dying. But people will die if medicines don't get here, as we were discussing yesterday. So it's a little bit more nuanced than you allow. Of course. Well, no, it's not that I don't allow the nuance. I accept the nuance. The point that I'm making is, let's be honest about it. Let's unpack it and say, was this shipping being disrupted in the way it is now? If October the reactions of October the 7th hadn't happened, that's really where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and I think I find that quite hard to believe. I also, we need to double check this. The problem is it's so hard to find specifics when the keywords are the same for different stories, different for more recent stories. But I think there was a hiatus of sorts during the it wasn't a ceasefire, was it? What's the right word, Aussie? When they actually stopped bombing Gaza and some of the hostages were released during that brief pause, that brief period of pause. I think that the Houthis stopped attacking ships in the Red Sea then, but I need to triple check that. And if that were true, then it puts Sunak on even thinner ice. So just run me through again why he would do. So let's work on the premise that it is linked, which is an opinion backed up with, I would say, quite a lot of evidence, but it can never become a fact because you can't read anybody's mind or know for sure why they're doing what they're doing. But let's say that it is linked and Sunak knows it's linked. Why is he so insistent, so adamant that it isn't linked? What's the win there? What's the gain there?
Because he'd be criticised for not putting more pressure on Israel to stop the bombing. And, and the irony here is that it's not just a blockade by the Houthis, it's a blockade of Gaza. You can't put humanitarian aid on the beaches of Gaza because you won't be allowed to. It's blockaded.
So Sunak has to say that they're not linked at all. Otherwise, questions, unanswerable questions filed under apparent double standards become very loud.
It's an election year. He can't afford to get this wrong, and he's dancing on the head of a pin at the moment. And
I'm still not 100% clear on why. Well, I suppose if you could, the only way in which you can not get involved in more robust conversations about ceasefire, join with the massive majority of countries in the world calling for one, is by clinging to the notion or still peddling the notion that these events have absolutely nothing to do with what's going on in Israel, Gaza. It's a good start, Ozzy. Page reminds us that the Houthis have said that it's all about Gaza. The barrage of strikes early on Friday against the Houthis, who say that they are acting in solidarity with Gaza, stoked fears of the Israel-Hamas war spreading across the region. So maybe to give Sunak a bit more of a break, maybe it's a way of dampening down talk of escalation if you claim it's got nothing to do with the... but this is from AFP correspondents in Yemen, the Associated Foreign Press. I do worry that we're not getting a full picture about a lot of these issues in Britain and America. So AFP correspondents in Yemen report that they have said American and British interests were legitimate targets after the Western allies launched deadly strikes following weeks of disruptive rebel attacks on Red Sea shipping. The barrage of strikes early on Friday against the Houthis, who say they are acting in solidarity with Gaza, stoked fears of the Israel-Hamas war spreading across the region. So if it's got nothing to do with the situation in Gaza, how can it be stoking fears of that war spreading across the region? This is the position that Rishi Sunak has put himself in. Informed international opinion is that the strikes on Friday stoke fears of the Israel-Hamas war spreading across the region. Rishi Sunak says what we did on Friday has absolutely nothing to do with the Israel-Hamas war. Come on, riddle me that. Zobia is in Ealing. Zobia, what would you like to say?
Hi. In response just to what you're saying about him saying it's completely separate.
I think he's saying that. I mean, I'm only responding to the words that he said. There could be something that I'm missing, but carry on.
Well, yesterday in Parliament, he stood up in response to Zara Sultana, and he, quote, said, she was asking for an immediate ceasefire, and he stood up and, quote, said, she should ask Hamas and the Houthis for a de-escalation. Why is he then responding and connecting the Houthis to Hamas if it's completely separate? And
also expecting, this is one of the bits I find really uncomfortable. I don't know whether it's deliberate or disingenuous, but he's suggesting that we should be negotiating with terrorist groups and that they should be treated in exactly the same way as a sovereign democracy of Israel.
Which we don't negotiate with terrorists. So
well, I know we don't, but yet apparently we'd have to in order to. So why then why does he want the idea that the strikes were completely unrelated to the Israel-Gaza conflict to be out there?
I think he feels like he'll get more support if it's not. If it's, he gives.
Who believes
reason.
him though? Who watches this with even a vaguely informed perspective and thinks, God, that's a coincidence. Look at that. They're taking pot shots at British and American ships in the Red Sea just a few miles down the road from Israel, Gaza. And the people taking the pot shots say that it's all being done in solidarity with Gaza. What a crazy coincidence when obviously it's got nothing to do with it at all. Is that really what he's I can't believe that's what he's asking us to believe.
He is. That's exactly. And it's a distraction and it's a, deflection. Yeah. So look at that. Look the other way. Look at what's going on here. Don't pay attention to that. And I think he does. And there will be some people that will believe him. And they all believe that, they're attacking our ships now.
So they'll believe it's an extraordinary coincidence that in the same square on the map of the Israel-Gaza conflict, these attacks on British and American ships, which just happen to belong to the two key allies of the Israeli government in that conflict, it's a complete coincidence.
Crazy coincidence. Well, but the fact, he stood up yesterday and he connected the two himself. So he put them in the same sentence together himself.
That's a good point.
So
I missed that. How can he be lumping them in as a sort of homogenous force if actually events being undertaken by both parties are completely separate. I don't know. I'd need to find some other answers, because I know you always think I'm naive when I do this, but it can't be as bad as it looks. There must be another interpretation, at least, of he can't simply be saying, oh, look, what a crikey, what a coincidence. Oh, crikey Moses, what a coincidence. I heard it as Rishi attempting to distance the Houthis from their own narrative. He seems to be saying that they aren't attempting to defend Palestine, but disrupting shipping for some other reasons. And that's why the UK-US had to strike. That's why it's nothing to do with the Israel-Hamas war, apparently. You sound a little sceptical. But I think that is what he's trying to do. But then the question becomes why? Why can't he just say that they're doing this in support of a ceasefire, in pursuit of a ceasefire, or even in support of the human beings in Gaza, but we're going to attack him anyway because he can't be attacking our ships? It's a funny one, isn't it? 11:30 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines. 11:34 is the time. Remarkable, although given what we've learned in the last month or so, unremarkable testimony at the House of Commons today, where the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry is underway, including testimony from some of the key players in that story and indeed that ITV drama, notably the former sub-postmasters Alan Bates and Joe Hamilton. Don't think less of me, but I just had a very unflattering thought during the break, which was I found myself thinking, I don't know if I can get my head around everything that's happening there today. I might just wait for season 2 of the drama. It's so neatly packaged up, although I am interviewing Nick Wallace, the journalist who arguably did more than any other to keep this story alive and in the public eye for full disclosure after the programme today. So I'll need to get my head around some of the elements that I haven't currently before 2 o'clock. But we will catch up with some of the events there. Perhaps the most striking is that only 3 convicted sub-postmasters have received their full compensation packages, as far as I can tell. And Bates talking about the delays in the compensation process, Alan Bates, describing one occasion where he waited 53 days just to hear back on one single point. He points out people are dying while waiting for their compensation. A factory of bureaucracy is how Joe Hamilton has described it, that makes you, in her words, feel like a criminal all over again. 36 minutes after 11 is the time. Just a strange one, although judging by my phone it has piqued your interest at least as much as it has piqued mine. Why was Rishi Sunak at such pains in the House of Commons yesterday to claim that the British and American attacks upon Houthi rebels in northern Yemen have absolutely nothing to do with the continuing bombardment of Gaza or the Hamas-Israel war, if you prefer that description? I don't quite get it, although I think the clouds are beginning to clear. It seems unlikely that anyone's going to argue he said it because it's true. So there is politics afoot, isn't there? But if you want to ring me and tell me that he said it because it's true, then the phone number remains 03456060973. Anthony's in Bletchley Park. Anthony, what would you like to say?
James, good morning. Just to briefly touch on that first point about was he telling the truth or being economical therewith, I would simply refer him to what Mohammed Abdul Salam, who's the chief Houthi negotiator to Saudi Arabia, actually said both in Arabic media and in English media, where he said the attacks were in response to the calls of the people of Palestine to support the oppressed of the Gaza Strip, which seems to me to be unequivocal.
It's so unequivocal. It makes me think that we might be missing something, in that, albeit that the words support what we're saying, perhaps his intention was a bit more different.
That brings me to the second point about why did he say it. My view is, and I'm writing on this at the moment, is I think he's specifically trying to decouple Iran from the Houthi attacks to avoid pointing the finger at Tehran. Because if he did that, he would make an appalling situation catastrophic by putting Iran on the spot, because everybody says the Iranian-backed Houthi. Yes. If he specifically links the attacks on shipping with Gaza, he is in essence saying, and it's yet another example of Tehran interfering and is an indirect attack on the UK and US and international shipping's interests. And the US and the UK at the moment are desperately trying to keep a lid on a conflict which is already spreading give you an example.
Yeah,
this hasn't really hit mainstream media, but this happened overnight in Kurdistan region, north of Iraq. Iran has admitted it fired a barrage of ballistic missiles against what they described as Israeli Mossad targets.
Right.
So by trying to separate the two conflicts, the UK and the US, bear in mind Biden's actually communicated indirectly with Iran in the last 2 days.
Yes, of course.
To try and keep the lid on this. I think that what Sunak is trying to do is almost send a message to Iran: we are not going to link you to this attack, in the hope that Iran will feed back down through their negotiating teams to the Houthis not to escalate it any further and to try and keep a lid on it. That's my assessment of what's going on at the moment.
Which is, I mean, very helpful and very clear, for which I thank you. Just to be sure I understand it completely, it also avoids any perception of the UK being in direct conflict with allies of Gaza, as it were. You said, because the Houthis are a rebel group in a mountainous region, whereas Iran is I can never remember, soon to be nuclear power or potential nuclear power or major force in the region. Iran will welcome this, won't they?
Well.
I read one analysis that said Iran will quite welcome this. They don't really want to be. They don't want their fingerprints to be too clear on the Houthis' actions.
What they're terrified of, well, one of the things that Tehran is terrified about is the Israelis deciding that the time has come for them to take executive action over the burgeoning Iranian nuclear program.
Right.
And Tehran is terrified that if the US cannot keep the lid on Israel might decide to take action against a power which might develop a nuclear capability. They're not that close to nuclear breakout, but they're not far away from it. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, were in there a month and a half ago, and this is all in public domain. This isn't anything confidential. And they noted with concern that the enrichment process has made the uranium and the plutonium that's being developed by the Iranians coming very close to the point where they could get to nuclear breakout, and that is concerning everybody hugely. And the second thing,
so the more rogue that Iran look, the more Israel might have a case for taking executive action.
And the second thing that they're terrified about is Donald Trump getting back into power.
Yes.
And so they are trying bizarrely, although you think it's bizarre looking at what's happening in regional geopolitics, by trying to keep a lid on it, by Iran not deliberately escalating against or overtly escalating against Israel, they are trying to send a message to Biden that they are prepared to try and keep some element of control so the conflict doesn't spread. Because what they're really worried about is if Trump gets in, he has got the ability to press a great big button which will fire all kinds of missiles at Iran, and we've already seen he'll do that. To give you a specific example, in January 2020, Trump authorized the killing of the IRGC Al-Quds commander Qasem al-Soleimani and a senior Iraqi militia commander, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, in a missile strike at Baghdad International Airport. Trump was offered three options: do nothing because that's the safe one, kill them and that will cause regional chaos, or send a message to the Iranians to tell the Iranians to stop interfering in regional politics. And Trump chose that his decision was to kill them. So the Iranians are under no illusions that Trump has got previous, and therefore the Iranians themselves, are trying to ensure that the conflict, although it is spreading, does not escalate. A spreading conflict is different to an escalating conflict.
Yes. Okay, I've got that. That's all pretty clear. If I were to bring it down to a Christmas cracker motto, Rishi Sunak is not telling the truth, but he may have quite good reasons for not doing so.
I don't think he's telling I think you have to separate it. I don't think he has told the truth about what he said about the reasons for the attack. But the second part, if you like, and there's a rotten Christmas cracker motto, is that I understand entirely why he feels he has to do it.
Yes.
Because there are greater issues in play. This is probably one of the very few examples I've seen of him actually trying to be an international statesman as opposed to domestic rabble rouser.
All right, no, good. I wanted someone to at least give him the benefit of the doubt. And briefly, on the point that lots of ships from lots of other areas have come under attack from the Houthis, Liberian, Bahamian, Norwegian, Arab. Yeah. Does that does that challenge the notion that he's not being completely honest, and that you could say that this is just about attacks upon ships in that channel and it's got nothing to do, whatever the Houthis may say, it's actually got nothing to do with what's going on in Gaza and Israel.
Well, you have to look at the timeline. The attacks only started again after the 7th of October.
Yeah.
So, you can say that's a pretty. It's like the old trout and the milk thing from Sherlock Holmes. Circumstantial evidence can be sometimes very compelling.
Yeah.
But the second thing is that what the Houthis actually said is that the attacks on international shipping, it's for vessels who are bound for occupied Palestine or going to Israel. So their justification is they're attacking vessels of any flag that might be going to Israel or, quote, occupied Palestine, unquote.
Yes.
So in their mind, that's their justification.
Yeah, and I mean, all the diplomacy in the world isn't going to change that fact, albeit we now have a much better understanding, for which I thank you, of why he would try to enforce that notion, not least for the reasons that you've shared about Iranian wishes, because that was the bit I struggled to understand yesterday, but I did in the end, about why Iran doesn't really want to be seen as being hand in glove with the Houthis, albeit that they're widely supported. And as Anthony reminds us, that's how the journalese describes them, isn't it? The Iran-backed rebels or the Iran-backed militia in the north of Yemen. It's coming up to 11:45. So that's what I wanted in a way, the idea that he has said something at least disingenuous, but not necessarily, I sound like Morecambe and Wise, but not necessarily for nefarious or questionable reasons. 11:48 is the time. It's well, as I said yesterday, it's difficult with such complex matters of international diplomacy to hold an opinion at all, never mind a pungent one that you can then furiously defend. But as I also said yesterday, it's quite liberating sometimes to recognise that you don't need to. And I thought Anthony covered that particular territory almost perfectly. It is at best disingenuous, at worst dishonest, of Rishi Sunak to claim that the strikes against Houthi rebels were completely unrelated to the Israel-Gaza conflict and were instead a direct response to the Houthis' attacks on international shipping. If I were to be generous, I would say that they were related to the Israel-Gaza conflict, but they were also a direct response to the Houthis' attacks on international shipping. And the diplomatic rationale for using the words that Sunak used brings Iran into the picture, and the intent or the ambition of not escalating the conflict by allowing Iran distance from the attack on the Houthi rebels. So in other words, he's trying to establish it was an attack on the rebels for what they did. It was not an attack upon the loose conglomerate of interests that they are part of, which would then include Iran. 11:50 is the time. Lawrence is in South Shields. Lawrence, what made you pick up the phone?
James, long-time listener, my friend. I listen to you every single day. You're the only one I listen to.
Thank you. There's lots of other good. I mean, you'd like Sheila's great and Nick Abbott.
No,
there's
Sheila
loads
is
of
good.
yes,
Sheila is good, but I like the way that you are methodical and you change the people's, the perceptive. You've got to come with you with facts.
Thank you.
Facts
I
every
hope
time,
so.
lovely.
Well, is there?
Right.
Okay.
We spoke before a couple of years ago. So I'm a Yemeni Brit. Dad Yemeni, mother English. I lived and worked in Yemen for 27 years, came back 2010.
Right.
Just before the uprising stuff. So I've got family there now. What people don't realise is that for 7 years, Yemen was bombarded back into the Stone Ages by a coalition of 10 countries supported by the UK and America. So they bombed for 7 years. Not one ship was attacked. Not one commercial ship during that 7 years of bombardment of Yemen.
Right.
Now, the Houthis have come out and they've said, and it's clear, because every person I speak to Yemeni is standing by the Houthis for the first time ever. We'll get back to that.
Yeah, well, no, let's just cover that now, because Frank Gardner, the BBC's security correspondent, says that their regional profile and popularity at home have really gone up. So that's an important point to make if we're going to understand the rest of it.
And they weren't like that before.
No.
This is the thing, and now they've become united. So when
is because they are perceived as having acted in the interests of the people in Gaza, essentially.
Without a
yeah.
I can speak to anybody, my cousins, my family, strangers here in the UK, Yemen. Everybody is standing with them, and the Houthis have said, and like you said, the caller beforehand, by the way, brilliant guy, the one that spoke before me.
Yes.
Sorry, yeah, excellent. He had mentioned that. When the hostages were released, there was a ceasefire. It stopped.
Yes, that's right.
And then So when Rishi Sunak, well, of course he's lying through his teeth. He has no choice but to lie through his teeth.
Why?
Because you've got the corporations. Don't forget. I can remember Sunak not saying much until BP mentioned that they are diverting from the Red Sea.
Right.
And I remember he started making noises then. When it comes down to these corporations that control us, James, and you know all of that.
Of course.
They're the ones that are the power. They're the ones that have told Sunak.
Yeah, but also, again, and I always do, people put me in this position of where I have to defend politicians that I find repellent. But also, that increases energy costs, and that is a domestic interest. That's not serving the interests of the oil companies, that's serving the interests of the customers. Nobody wants energy price. We've all seen what happens when energy prices rocket, haven't we?
Absolutely.
So, there's a little more to it than that. It's not just about corporations.
You know what it is, James? For the first time in our lives, I mean, I'm nearly 60. We were brought up talking about the Holocaust and what happened to the Jews in Germany, etc. And we're seeing live now. We were told this. I was indoctrinated in school. We were taught about this. No facts. We were just taught.
Yes.
A few still pictures, a few black and white pictures. No, we've got that. We're seeing live in 2023 a live genocide. Now I know that can be people say, well,
it's not the right.
Well,
it's not a question of and it is a word that I think people are going to reach for more and more as the bombardment continues. But it is not a genocide, either semantically or technically. I think anyone would struggle to deny the accusation of ethnic cleansing. But the notion of a genocide, of people being targeted and killed to the point of extinction because of their ethnicity, simply doesn't apply here, Lawrence, at the moment. I'm sorry. I'm not going to argue with you about it. But it's an incredible... Well, you're welcome to disagree with me, but you can check the dictionary definition, I think.
I'll tell you one thing has happened. Okay, Yemen's very tribal, correct?
Yes, I think you told me. Go on.
What are the Houthis? That say, listen, I'm a Sayadi.
Yes.
A Sayadi tribe is in Yemen. The Houthi tribe, they're in Saada. That's where some of the missiles hit. The Houthi tribe itself are no more than 20,000 people.
Right.
What you're seeing now, those million-man marches, the Yemenis have united against one cause.
Which is Israel.
And...
Or Israel is a country. The cause is the bombardment of Gaza.
The cause, what they're doing... My friend, for 7 years, they were bombarded. I've lost family members because of missiles bought, sent by the UK and sent by America. That's fine, But they didn't
300, nearly 400,000 people dead, either directly or from famine and disease during that.
That's correct. That's correct. And I've lost family through that as well.
I'm sorry to hear that, Lawrence.
God bless them.
Yes, exactly.
We're strong believers in right, James, like you are. We will not be silent. We will continue. My call is like a Christmas tree with Palestinian flags on it. I will support. If this happened today in Nazi Germany, I'll be on top of the building screaming against the Nazis for my Jewish brothers. Simple as that. This has nothing to do with, you're Yemeni, you're Muslim, and they're Jew. Nothing. This is right and wrong. I'm human.
Okay, I need to acknowledge that drawing parallels, particularly for many Jewish people, between what Israel is doing and what was done to Jewish people during the war can be a deeply hurtful and problematic position. But I think you've expressed yourself quite diplomatically, and I understand precisely the point you're making. I'll give you, in conclusion, the United Nations definition of genocide, and people can take away from that what they will. It describes any of 5 acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial or religious group. And there are certainly politicians in Israel who have expressed language and desires that would fit that category completely. So we'll leave it. We'll leave that hanging, and I look forward to talking to you again, Lawrence. Thank you. David is in Kingston. David, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. I think the reason that he's saying it is to keep public support, because if it's in the public's mind that the reason that these attacks are happening on the ships is because they're, say, protesting to stop the war in Palestine, then most people are going to agree with that.
About 70% of the British population is going to agree with the desire for a ceasefire. They're probably not going to agree with deploying these tactics to achieve it.
Well, they're probably going to be more interested in children, to stop children being blown up and killed and orphaned and all of that.
It changes the narrative completely, doesn't it? If the Houthis are seen as acting in defence of Palestinian people in Gaza, as opposed to in offence at unspecified commercial interests or Western enmity. I think
the hearts and the minds being on the enemy side is obviously a massive problem if you're engaging in military attacks.
And that is, again, one of the elements of the whole conversation that's missing from an astonishing amount of the coverage, which is that the governments of the UK, I'm not across the American numbers, are completely detached from public opinion, which is another question perhaps for another show. Thank you, David. I'm going to squeeze in one more call on this. Mike's in Brent. Mike, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Look, I think that Sunak is not motivated by the war in Gaza. From his words, what I take from it is that he is doing this in response to what he said was the biggest attack on our Navy for decades.
Yes.
Now, to say there is no connection with the war in Gaza is clearly wrong, but that isn't his motivation, because if it had been, he wouldn't have attacked the Houthis if they hadn't attacked the shipping.
Yes, but they wouldn't have attacked the shipping if it wasn't for what was happening in Gaza. It's impossible to prove, but that seems to be what most people have taken away from his words, and I think you might be right. That wasn't actually his intention. He was trying to separate the two, a little ambitiously, but even if nothing was happening in Gaza and the Houthis had done that to our ships, we would have attacked them, is what he's saying.
Yes, and I think the other point to make is, although the Houthis might be claiming that they're doing what they're doing in order to support the people of Gaza, I think it's important to make the distinction. Whatever they say, they're actually doing it in support of Hamas. And supporting Hamas is not the same as supporting the people of Gaza.
No, that's very true.
You know, there is an argument that Hamas is not doing what they're doing in support of the people.
That's an argument.
It's Gaza
a stone-cold
either.
Fact, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, if Hamas cared about the people of Gaza, they wouldn't have done what they did in the first place and then run and hide in schools, mosques, hospitals, using them as human shields. Hamas are not interested in the people of Gaza. I know that seems a peculiar thing to say.
Not remotely.
But they're actually
not remotely. It's not even controversial.
They're motivated by their charter that they say they want to kill Jews, and they claim the whole of the land from the river to the sea. And that is also the same aim of Iran, who've previously said they want to wipe Israel off the map.
And I think it also appears in some Likud statements of intent as well, doesn't it? Just to make sure that we are painstakingly balanced.
Okay, I don't know what you're referring to, and I haven't seen that. So, okay. But the point is that I do not believe Hamas is interested in the people of Gaza.
No, nor do I. But I think we're getting away from the central point a little bit, and I like your analysis because it means that Rishi Sunak hasn't treated us all like complete idiots again. He has essentially established that, I mean, I think he's on thin ice claiming that there's no link at all. But under your analysis, he's trying to separate them and claim that there's no link. If the Houthis had attacked these ships 10 years ago, 2 years ago, 20 minutes ago, 10 years from now, regardless of what was going on in Gaza, we would have responded in the way that we did. And I think that's true. But
I think that's true too.
The next bit of the conversation, which is when you say, why have they attacked the ships, is where it becomes harder to sustain the notion that the events aren't linked. And I don't think that leaves Sunak in a position as ugly or as dishonest as a lot of us began thinking of. It is 12 noon. You are listening to LBC. I'm James O'Brien. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. Just to clarify that last point that Mike wasn't aware of, I didn't have the facts at my fingertip. That river to the sea phrase that proves so thorny for quite rightly and understandably for so many was indeed used by the ruling party in Israel, Likud, as part of their 1977 election manifesto, which stated Judea and Samaria will not be handed to any foreign administration between the sea and the Jordan. There will only be Israeli sovereignty. So again, as ever, trying to walk the tightrope on this, conscious of the fact that if you manage to be balanced, you're going to end up upsetting almost everybody. It's still important to try. And I think that I'm going to do something a bit different next with Donald Trump. The fact that he's returning to the political fray, he secured an impressive majority of the Republican members who turned out to vote at the Iowa caucus. I don't know that the numbers are spectacular in the context of history, and I'm pretty sure that Iowa, I think Marco Rubio won Iowa last time round. I think he did in 2016. I could be wrong, but it's not an indicator of anything for certain. But I think you'd have to be a very brave punter to bet against Donald Trump getting the Republican nomination. And I was going to have a conversation about the psychology of supporting him, but then I heard earlier the objection to a charge sheet being assembled. I want to talk about Donald Trump's appeal, but I don't want you to tell me about all the awful things he's done, which seems to me to be an extraordinary position to adopt, given that the real mystery of Donald Trump's appeal is the awful things that he's done. That's the point, isn't it? It's the psychology of somebody who can not care about the attempt to steal an election, not care about the attempt to launch an insurrection on the seat of American democracy, not care about the abuse of Gold Star military veterans, Gold Star dead soldiers. You know, So, should we try and knit the two together this hour? So, I think we should make a list. I need lists. I love a list. I want a list of the worst things Trump has done. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the thing that you find most offensive, because there might be a bit of consensus on that. We might all more or less agree about it being the January the 6th incident or whatever it may be. And we'll include his personal conduct as well, you know, that time that he was recorded boasting about sexually assaulting women. I think we need to put the list back together. And then the question becomes not what is the magic of Donald Trump or what is the curious appeal of Donald Trump. That plays into the idea that he's not disgusting, as indeed does the idea that calling him disgusting delights his fans. I mean, morality involves consistency. If someone boasts about sexually assaulting women, I don't care whether or not calling that out as disgusting somehow delights people who like Donald Trump. If you stop calling out men who boast about sexually assaulting women, then you tacitly endorse sexually assaulting women. And Trump boasts about it. So I want to do both. I want the list. I want you to help me. Ted Cruz, I think, in 2016, not Marco Rubio, sorry. Which gives you an idea about what Iowa is like. Thank you. God, I've got such amazing listeners. I'm now getting bombarded with corrections on the Marco Rubio Ted Cruz mistake. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This isn't what radio phone-in programs used to look like. In fact, we know what they used to look like. It used to look like attempts to discuss Donald Trump's appeal while insisting that you don't list all of the disgusting things that he's done. Whereas to me, that's the absolute heart of the question. How can somebody with such a catalogue of depravity, he makes Boris Johnson look like Mother Teresa. Don't text me to remind me that Mother Teresa wasn't quite the sainted figure that popular opinion held. I've read my Christopher Hitchens. I would hope, obviously. That's the real question, is how that this long list, this catalogue of depravity can be irrelevant, if you like, to the people still queuing up to support him. So, 9 minutes after 12, there are two elements to this hour. There is a reminder of, and I'll tell you what, if you actually take me by surprise, if you come up with something I've forgotten, I'll give you a copy of my new book. I'll send you a copy of How They Broke Britain. It's not about American politics. It's very, very much about British politics. But if there's something that I have genuinely forgotten about or was previously unaware of on the list of gross things that Trump did, then I'll let you have a copy of How They Broke Britain by James O'Brien. Me. But that's just a side order. The main point of this is to remind ourselves about the catalogue of depravity and to ask ourselves why it doesn't matter, okay? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Because I used to sit here, and it's funny, isn't it? In my mind, it's all tied up with post-Brexit period as well. And you would struggle to remember everything. Same with Boris Johnson. You know, the way in which it was so difficult to hold Boris Johnson to account, because the thing, while you were holding him to account for the disgusting thing that he did yesterday, he'd do something disgusting today. And you'd think, well, how do I... They're trying to give Ed Davey a kicking for the post office scandal. He was a minister in the relevant department for less than 2 years in the middle of a Conservative administration. But because if you're Ed Davey, there's nothing else in your track record that you can get a kicking for, he's in the crosshairs on this. If you're Boris Johnson, it's almost impossible to get him in your crosshairs because as you're attacking him for making one disgusting political intervention, he's already halfway through the next one. And I found Trump like that. I found Trump very much almost impossible to track. And there was a little alarm bell that went off on yesterday's programme. I don't know if you heard it. We had a caller, traditionally a Republican, conservative, deeply troubled by the direction of traffic in this country on the right of politics, but obviously considerably more troubled by the direction of traffic in his native America. I think he was from Kentucky. Lovely bloke, amazing accent. And he used the word hyperbolic to describe the talk about Trump and dictatorship. And I couldn't help hearing echoes of all the other stuff we described as hyperbolic. Most obviously, I think, the idea that he won't accept defeat in the election. If Trump loses, he will wriggle and squirm and do anything to try to cling on to power. And I don't think any of us fully appreciated how dangerous that was, how profound a threat that posed to democracy. And we saw it unfold in real time. I remember watching it on screen and thinking of all the people in my profession that had been warm towards Donald Trump or who had conducted phone-ins about what his magic might be and not repeatedly pointed out the reality of what he represented. Because what he represents is, I believe today, a threat to the safety of the world, a threat to American democracy, upon which, whether you like it or not, huge amounts of stability and peace in the West depend. And if you think that there would be an improvement in the parts of the world where stability and peace are not prioritised, then I've got a bridge I would like to sell you. So the other thing I reject absolutely, and I didn't always reject this, there was a little bit of me that thought that, gosh, maybe if they really do like it when people like me... Do you remember the caller we took? I wonder how many people knew that I'd end up remembering this call. It was an astonishing call. It got into my first book from a fella who I just wanted to know how you could still... I wanted to know how you could like being lied to, which is quite a naive question given what's happened since. But in the aftermath of Brexit and Trump's election, I was fascinated by the fact that you knew you'd been lied to by now. And if you didn't know in 2017, good God, you know now. But why do you like being lied to? And it was when Trump was in this country attacking our democratically elected British mayor, Sadiq Khan, albeit that he has brown skin and is of a Muslim background, which of course repels an awful lot of people who are attracted to Donald Trump. But a foreign leader coming here and attacking our democratically elected mayor, extraordinary really when you think about it. But he, of course, enjoyed support from corners of the British media and British politics. I always felt that was one of the saddest days of the late Queen's life, when she had to treat him with the respect that his office commanded, even as he denigrated that office on an almost daily basis. But the bit that was fascinating to me was how you can like being lied to. And we took a call from a bloke. I forget where he was. And he said, I know that he's lying. He was giving a speech in London at the time, Trump, and he was talking, if memory serves, talking about the size of the crowds outside the building where he was giving the speech. And we had a camera outside the crowds. I could see it on my screen. Not we LBC, as in we the public, we the people inhabiting reality. And there was a camera. I could see it on my screen. So I had him on one screen giving a speech and a camera outside the building on another screen where it was more or less empty. And he was on the other screen saying there's crowds outside, huge crowd. And I just thought that's incredible. He really has reached that point of politics where you can lie through your teeth and people will lap it up. And my caller said, I know he's lying, but I love it because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. And I've got a horrible feeling I might have laughed my head off at the time. But really, it never gets any more sophisticated than that, the analysis. You know, people who try, and they are flawed and fallible people, but people who try and promote values of fairness and equality, and people who appear to understand things, must really, really boil the urine of people who don't understand much and who hate the idea of equality or fairness, because if you've spent your whole life privileged, then equality feels like oppression. And even if you haven't got a pot to pee in, if you grew up white in this country, you have enjoyed more privilege than people who didn't in many ways, in many obvious ways. So that was the thing for me. Now, that was an incredible moment. I know he's lying, but I love it because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. And I wondered, well, when do the lies stop appealing to you? And they don't, do they? They never stop appealing to you. I love being lied to. He describes a world I wish I lived in which I'm a victim. He describes a world I wish I lived in which Muslims are banned from the entire country. He described a world I wish I lived in, where you're allowed to march up to women and grab them by the genitals and boast about it afterwards, secure in the knowledge that Nigel Farage will describe it as locker room talk. There's no real mystery here. The world that Trump describes, which strikes some of us as depraved and medieval and disgusting, some people love the sound of it. He'll never deliver it, but some people love the sound of it. So that's my answer to the first question that I'm going to ask you today, which is about what's the psychological reward for supporting Donald Trump? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What's the psychological reward? What is the equivalent of the, I know he's lying, but it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan? Even my ego's not big enough to think that I deserve to be treated with that level of importance. I don't mind the fact that I love the fact that the most powerful man in the world is lying, because it upsets some gob on a stick on my radio who really gets on my nerves when he reminds me that the problems in my life aren't caused by immigration. They're caused by the politicians I've spent my whole life voting for. It's incredible, isn't it? I saw a tweet the other day. Someone had just arrived in Lanzarote and they'd got through customs quite easily. So they tweeted me to claim that somehow proved that all of the coverage of the damage that Brexit has done to the country must be false. And you sort of think, there's a little bit of you that's flattered. You think, but then you immediately start feeling sorry for the fellow's family. You've gone on holiday. You've found negotiating customs at Lanzarote Airport quite straightforward. So you think that proves that there are no shortages or problems or red tape or Brexit-related issues, despite the fact that everybody involved in... So I know what I'm going to do on the taxi from the airport to the hotel. I'm going to tweet James O'Brien about the fact that Brexit has gone wrong. Hasn't gone wrong. Clearly, Brexit's going brilliantly because Lanzarote Airport's customs are operating as efficiently as they did before we left the European Union. You sort of have to be careful not to let your ego run away with you on stuff like this. But I am supremely confident that there must be more to the psychological reward for supporting Donald Trump than upsetting people who find him obnoxious. When the evidence of his obnoxiousness is absolutely... In fact, the only way you could conduct a conversation about Donald Trump that was helpful to him would be to ban people contributing to it from reminding everybody else of all the disgusting things that he's done. So let's do that as well. What's the most disgusting thing he's done? Well, or what do you want to put on the list? It doesn't have to be top of your tree. What should we put on the list of Donald Trump's, let's call it a charge sheet. That's a good phrase, except these are not charges, these are convictions, things that he's actually done. And then secondly, what is the psychological reward for supporting someone so obviously depraved? 0345 6060 973. 22 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where Donald Trump's predictably successful return to the political fray prompts once again any right-thinking person to wonder how millions of Americans can be untroubled by a catalogue of depravity that is worthy of the worst Roman emperor. So help me make the list and then tell me what it is that supporters get in return for either endorsing, encouraging or ignoring the the never-ending list of disgusting behaviours. Behaviours which, I touch the Boris Johnsons, if it were any other politician, any other American president, would have been close to, if not completely, career ending. Millen's in Paris. Millen, you can start us off. What would you like to say?
Necessarily the most morally depraved thing.
Well, we're going to have to improve that phone line, Millen. I'll try and come back to you shortly. Khalid is in Edmonton. Khalid, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Hydroxychloroquine, in terms of the list of things
that was good, wasn't it? Well, no. What about the bleach?
I know. I mean, it's.
Did he say you could shine lights down people's throats, and that would? Did he say that, or did I imagine that? And that would.
I can't remember. I mean, I just saw a recent Guardian study saying that hydroxychloroquine actually increases the chances of death if you take it.
Yes, I saw that as well. But hey ho, none of it touches him. We'll address that mystery another day. What do the supporters get in?
I think they get to coalesce against this. He's a cult figure. I mean, my wife's from the US. I travel to the US quite often. He is so much a cult figure. He reminds me of David Koresh. Remember, a blind faith from the support. Doesn't matter what he says, what he does.
Yeah, but Koresh promises eternal salvation, doesn't he? Or cult leaders generally say that everyone else is going to die and you'll be fine. So it's not quite. I mean, I suppose there's a bit of that, is there?
Well, there's that famous quote: "He could go down Fifth Avenue and shoot someone, and no one would touch him." I mean, it just feels that he represents something that the right in the US, and this is really the fault of the political system in the US. People on the right just don't have a voice, and they only see Donald Trump as the alternative. They only see him as the anti-establishment figure that they can coalesce around to basically wage war with the woke left in the States.
But the liberals. Woke wasn't even a word before he became president, was it? That's a recent development. It's not even a... So what do you mean by... I know it's not your position, but what anti-establishment, when he's... Yeah. You know, he's got a fortune built upon inherited wealth. He spent his life swanning around New York with Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know what the establishment is if it's not people like that.
It's the swamp in Washington, the perceived swamp in Washington, the Hillary Clinton, the Obamas. I think people in America have just.
But they liked George W. Bush, didn't they? They liked Ronald Reagan. They liked other Republican presidents, and he's a complete rejection of all of that.
Indeed, but the level of polarisation in the US now is incredible. I mean, we're getting like that here in the UK, but not to the level of the US. I mean, people are falling apart. Families are falling apart in the US because it's Trump's fault.
And they get this, but it doesn't. Listen, I can meet you halfway. I suppose cult leaders always do disgusting things, don't they? But the psychology of the reward is he's sticking it to an imagined enemy or an exaggerated enemy, whether it's the blob or the establishment or the swamp or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. How can people be so what's the word I'm looking for? So unhappy, so opposed to this imagined enemy that they don't care at all about what their hero does. They genuinely don't care at all about what he does. That's the bit I don't get. That idea of him having a carte blanche from his own supporters to I mean, he got what was the conviction in the E. Jane Carroll case? I'm always a little unclear on precisely what the technicalities are, but she accused him of rape. Nobody cares from his base.
No, and I think that my answer to that, and I'm sure I'll be interested in what other people say, but my answer to that is that he gives people a sense of belonging. He gives people on the right a sense of belonging. This is our man. We're standing by him. Doesn't matter what he does. He defends us from the woke left and the liberal policies. And it means that they can take a view. They can take a stance and say, right, this is where we stand for. This is what we do.
Finally, someone speaks for me. And I don't really pay much attention to what it is that he says. He just says he speaks to me, and therefore I choose to believe him. It is extraordinary, isn't it? And also the idea that he's right-wing is a little bit comical as well. I would, if he'd run for politics in the 1990s, I'm pretty sure he would have been a Democrat. And yet people who identify as deeply racist are persuaded that he's very much one of them. I suppose that... actually, I don't want to preempt anybody else's contribution. Patrick's in Battersea. Patrick, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
For me, it's the... double-page spread in the newspapers in New York in '89 when the Central Park 5 situation occurred, and not retracting his...
Bring back the death penalty. Bring back our police. all 5 of those men later completely exonerated of the crime. But if Donald Trump has... And do you think that was racism?
Oh, yeah.
I don't mean that...
He had previously been convicted of failing to allow anybody to rent or buy his apartments. He wouldn't let blacks or Hispanics, remember? He got convicted of that by the New York...
so what's the point at which you say, and I don't think anyone in America had done this, really, the point at which you say, if you support him, you must support that. You need to make them turn around and say, yes, I do. I think that's where Clinton misfired slightly when she called them all deplorables, and they said, yes, we are. You need to go in on the specifics. God, listen, I respect your right to cast a vote, but I'm surprised that you approve of sexual assault of women. I'm surprised that you approve of killing innocent black men. I'm surprised that you approve. Do you see what I mean?
They don't care. I have seen a woman in America in a T-shirt that says Donald Trump can grab this with an arrow pointing down.
I have as well. And I don't. We could sit here for 100 years, could we, you and me, and never understand her?
Never understand her, never understand those who claim to be Christians, who think he's a Christian.
I heard someone say family values, actually, in Iowa yesterday. He represents family values, and you sort of think, well, which family?
All of it. None of it makes sense, but it's a cult, and you can't... Some people are just too far gone.
Is that a word that closes down the conversation? I don't know, because I still can get my head around what a cult leader sells to his followers, what a cult leader gets from his followers.
What he sells to them is a make America great again. The questions they don't ask themselves is, when was America great, and who was it great for?
And what would it look like?
Who was it great for?
Oh, that's a very good point, actually. That's a very good point. Thank you, Patrick. When I said woke was a new word, a few of you correcting me, I meant in terms of political saliency. And I know it's been around for a lot longer than 30p Lee, but the attempt to turn it into a negative and use it politically, that's relatively new. And I don't think it was around in 2015, 2014. I could be wrong. 12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox has your headlines. It is 12:34. Supporters, writes Emma, get validation for their pre-existing belief that they've been deliberately kept down in life by them with a capital T. The commies, the liberals, the gays, and now the trans. They're all hell-bent on keeping Joe Ordinary away from his manifest freedom trademark. If not for them, capital T, every Joe would be free to own his own homestead and fire his guns off the porch and call his brown neighbour a slur. Trump is the only one who dares, in quotes, to stand up to them, capital T. I don't think there's anything to fault in that analysis. But what about the people who are quite well off? You know, the people who flock to Florida to stay at his weird resort. I mean, the people who can't possibly argue. Are they just besieged? Are they like Daily Mail readers in the home counties? They just think that any minute now, great big hordes of Polish lorry drivers are going to come over the horizon and take away their houses and their livelihoods and their comfort. So even if you're comfortably off, he is the kind of politician who works very hard to persuade you that everything you have is under threat. That's like the old cartoon of Rupert Murdoch sitting at a table with a punter and a plate of biscuits and putting and an immigrant, and there's 10 biscuits on the table, and he puts 9 of them in his pocket and then says to the punter, that immigrant's nicked your biscuit. He does that. Your biscuits, they're going to steal your biscuits. So I used to puzzle over why people like Paul Dacre, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail, are so terrified of modernity and change when they've got grouse estates that receive very generous grants, or used to receive generous grants from the European Union, and he's got several houses and an amazingly cosseted, gilded lifestyle, albeit that his dream of getting a seat in the House of Lords that he routinely attacks for being an unelected chamber has come to naught because of Boris Johnson's collapse. I was used to wonder, how can you be so terrified of modernity and change and diversity and the modern world? And the answer is because I'm terrified that they're going to take away what I've got. So it works both ways. If you've got a lot, you're terrified that the woke mob are going to take it away. And if you've got nothing, it's the woke mob's fault. But how does Trump become the vessel for that madness? Given that he is, I suppose the latest story is the Jeffrey Epstein one. There's a picture of it. I don't know if you've seen the footage of him and Epstein, the notorious paedophile and sex trafficker. They're kind of at some sort of club. Apparently, they'd be out all the time together back in the day, and they're whispering to each other about the very young girls that they're checking out. But hey ho, 12:37 is the time. Back to Paris. Millen's there. Millen, try again. Where were we?
Hello. I think the most destructive thing Trump's done, if not the most morally abject, is the packing of the Supreme Court. I think in his term, 3 Supreme Court justices were placed in the court. And if we just look at like the 3 most influential decisions they've made in the last year, they decreased the power of the EPA. Yeah. They banned abortion, and they stated that it was non-constitutional to ban publicly carrying a gun in states which had previously banned it. They're also considering currently Obergefell, Lawrence and Griswold, which currently enshrine the right to contraception and the right to same-sex relationships in the US.
Right. I mean, all presidents will appoint judges who are more aligned with their causes than not, won't they?
That's true, but they don't necessarily appoint ones like Clarence Thomas, whose wife explicitly participated in the January the 6th stuff.
Of the stuff you mentioned, it's the repeal of Roe versus Wade that is probably the most historically significant at the moment.
Yes, and the precedent that it sets for the rights of Americans in the future.
And for a man who boasts about his sexual assaults on women and has, been in a civil case, I think, being found guilty of one. It's an extraordinary position to take, isn't it? And it's perhaps the best example of the gulf between reality and support. So, evangelical Christians can support a man who's talked about the sexual attractiveness of his own daughter in the past and who has been convicted or not convicted, but his lawyer has been convicted of paying off a pornographic actress who'd had sex with him. I mean, it's extraordinary that he gives. So what do they get in return? They get the repeal of Roe versus Wade, even though it's been delivered to them by someone who represents all of the things that they're supposed to be opposed to.
And even though the popularity of the ban on abortion has been decreasing since it's been banned, people don't like not having access to abortion.
No, but those people did. As it were, I see what you mean. You mean since the ban, yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? And the psychological reward, as opposed to the legislative reward for supporting him, even as his depravity is undeniable. Unless, I suppose, you ban people from reminding each other of his depravity, in which case you could have a very odd conversation about what his appeal is. How can he have any appeal when everybody knows how disgusting he is?
I got nothing.
No, well, because you can't feel it, and that's where we come back to cars. I think Clarence Thomas was already there, actually, Millen, just for the record, as it were. I don't think he was a Trump appointee, but he is, of course, still there. At risk of invoking Godwin's law, well, I can tell you a bit about Godwin's law. Godwin's law is the idea, very clever idea, that any argument ever conducted on the internet will eventually result in someone invoking Hitler. But Godwin has gone on the record and said, I'm calling it off with regard to Donald Trump. He has literally said, that is not, doesn't apply in this case, because a lot of the warnings and parallels are fairly clear. There's a history podcast running a series on the rise of Nazism. The parallels in methodology between Hitler and Trump are glaring. Nazism was a youth movement that was outward-facing compared to a white working-class movement. The stage-managed rallies, complicit media interested in circulation, and the enhancing of disenfranchised people all come from the same playbook, except it was the Jews that were holding people back, or the Jews that were about to come and steal all your wealth if you were comfortable. It's the same appeal, except now it's the woke mob or the Muslims or I don't know the Mexicans. If you've got, that was the bit I think I struggled with. How can you fall for this crap if you actually have stuff? And the answer is they're all going to steal it. As a student of the Daily Mail's depravity, you'd have thought I'd have spotted that a little bit earlier, wouldn't you? But nobody's perfect. 12:42 is the time. Sean's in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Sean, what would you like to say?
Good morning. Good morning. Long time listener, first time calling in.
Welcome.
I was. By the way, back in the day, I remember there was a caller who said to you that you're like a oasis of truth and a desert of lies, and it truly is, man. You teach a master class on how to get down to the nitty gritty of what the callers are or what the question is, and as much respect. I drive a truck going from 5 a.m. When you cut on, so I listen to you rolling to North Carolina. But today I'm calling you because you're talking about Trump and some of the disgusting things that he has done. And the first thing that came to mind was when he went down to Puerto Rico during the disaster that they had after 2 hurricanes and hit them. They go down there. He goes down there and he's all like, "Yeah, you guys are throwing our budget all out of whack on trying to help you guys out," and which is not the right time to be talking about money when you got people who are like, "Yeah, my house is gone." And then when he was at one of the emergency shelters, and he's, instead of being dignified and handing out the supplies to people, he's throwing paper towels to the back.
It was
and
actual
to the
paper
middle.
towels. They're literally throwing paper towels to people whose homes had been washed away.
Yeah, and just like their T-shirts at a concert.
Yeah.
It's
extraordinary.
That's the problem.
It's more than a problem. It's the proof. It's a proof of the cultishness, really. I mean, presumably a lot of people there were profoundly unimpressed. But I mean, literally, like kitchen towel, big rolls of paper towels being thrown into the crowd of people whose homes had been destroyed by hurricane. I'd say it's just breathtaking. So what do the people who support him get in return, Sean? What's the psychological reward?
See, for some reason, they feel like he's talking to, he's speaking their language. He's talking to them. He's like, they are, because if you forget about the politics part of it, a lot of us on each side, we understand that there's a lot of things that the government is doing, and it ain't cool.
Sure.
The word woke, as me being a 45-year-old black man, the word woke always meant to us, like back in the 80s and everything, was paying attention to what the government is doing to you.
Yes.
Some things look like it's nice and it's good, but then you find out that it's all a dirty, underhanded scheme. And us being the pawns.
Yes.
So a lot of us will sit. A lot of my friends who are Trump fans, like they're Republicans, and
really,
and it's sad because we were all cool growing up, and there was no problems and everything, and now my Facebook is a ghost yard because
you have to cut at some point. At some point, you have to sort of cut contact, I suppose. How do they process January the 6th, Sean? How do they deal with the fact that do they actually believe that the election was stolen from him? Do you have to go along with all the lies, or can you sort of close your eyes to some of them?
No, they are fully embraced in everything. Wow. Okay, so we know that a lot of when it comes to the movements, especially as that being woke, paying attention, a lot of the movements that we had going in the 80s, like we knew that there was FBI agents and CIA agents and people who were in there designed to make the movement go awry. Yeah, whenever there's a dog, there's always fleas on a dog. Yeah, and so what they have decided, with them wanting to talk about defunding the police, like how we were talking about, but now they're talking about it, and now they're also talking about how there were FBI agents and CIA agents who were
trying to foment the rebellion, foment the insurrection. People like under.
Yeah. No, they were in there, and then there'll be some guy they'll point out and they'll be like, "You see him? See how his hat is? That's not right."
It's extraordinary, isn't it? And they believe that he had the votes and that they were somehow taken from him, or do you not go there?
Like, no matter how much proof you show. No matter how much proof, no matter how many times you tell him that he done been in, he done got turned down in courts all across America. I can't remember whether it was 66 or it was a lot of court cases that he tried to bring in there to say that, oh no, they were lying, that they stole it from us and everything, and every one of them, even Trump appointed judges, end up throwing out the case.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but But yet and still, you'll tell them all these things. You'll bring them all this proof, and they'll still look at it and be like, "Oh no, that wasn't the truth. That ain't
can't
right."
be right. Listen, we could do this for 100 years. I hope I get to talk to you again, Sean. Perhaps as the election gets closer, you could be our official American correspondent. But we could. I think you're the same. We could sit here for 100. We could sit here for 100 years, right? And we're never going to get like textbook A-grade answers to the questions that we're asking, because so much of it goes almost deeper than psychology.
I mean, and I fully think that at this day and age now, he's thinking, if I keep throwing out a bunch of, as you would say, rubbish, keep throwing this out, eventually you're going to forget about some things and go to whatever's the first thing to come to your mind, because there's so many of them.
Yeah, I mean,
there's actually a count. There's actually a count going on of how many lies he's told and his administration. And it was something like within the first couple of months, it was over 1,000 some lies that he had already told.
And so how do you know which one to pick on? How do you know which thread to pull? I think that's a huge part of it, mate. I really do. The idea that if he only told a couple of lies, then you could really go all in on them and bring down the whole edifice. But while you're busy getting cross about the lie he told yesterday, he's already told 5 more today. Sean, thank you. And thank you so much for your kind words as well. Very special. It's 12:48. 12:51 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Listen, you know these clips. That's why the lad yesterday who used the word hyperbolic set an alarm bell off in my head. I remember when people said if he loses the election, he'll insist that he hasn't. And that could have ended much worse than it did. If he gets back in again, I think he'll leave the White House in a box, regardless of how many years have passed from his election. I think he'll learn from his mistakes. And when I suggested to you that this conversation now about the death of democracy, about Trump essentially seeing himself, if he wins the election, as having received a mandate to set up a dictatorship, it's not built on nothing. You know, there's a group called the Young Turks that do some amazing work in America. Kind of like the kind of stuff that, imagine if I went out with a microphone and found all the people who went viral when they called in. Be an astonishing. I'd have to do a lot of schlepping around, wouldn't I? But it's kind of a bit like that, as in they're only really compelling. It's got very little to do with me and everything to do with what's coming out of the mouths of the people that I'm talking about. And the Young Turks were in Iowa for this caucus, and this is what they found.
Would you rather have 4 years of Donald Trump as a dictator or 4 years and Biden reelected?
You know, you don't have to like the words that come out of the man's mouth, but sometimes in life we all need a good paddling from the principal to set our life on the right track. And this country does need a little bit of that. We need a little paddling. I mean, I was a problem child growing up, and it took a good leadership to set me straight. So I think our country does need some of that. So I hands down believe people wanted it 4 years ago, 3 years ago. So,
but they didn't vote that way, right?
I don't know about that.
You think it was a stolen election?
Without a doubt.
The other day, Donald Trump said on his first day he's going to be a dictator for a day.
I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Would you rather have Donald Trump as a dictator for 4 years or re-elect Joe Biden for 4 years?
I would rather have Donald Trump. I'd like to see the repeal the Roosevelt law so that he can be a president for a lot more than 4 years. But this country needs a dictator. I hate to say that, but it's the truth.
Donald Trump said in a speech that on day one, for a day, he would be a dictator. What do you think of that?
No idea. I don't know.
Would you rather have 4 years of Donald Trump as a dictator or 4 years of Joe Biden as a president?
Trump.
As a dictator?
Maybe.
Would you rather have 4 years of Donald Trump as a dictator or 4 years of Joe Biden as a president?
Donald Trump all the way.
Even as a dictator?
Yes, yes.
Even coming out of Slovakia?
Yes, yes.
Would you rather have 4 years of Donald Trump as a dictator or 4 years of Joe Biden as a president?
No, we have a dictator currently, so.
Yes, we do.
Good Lord. And that's fascism. Everyone thinks that fascism arrives sort of in a speedboat or something and takes everybody by surprise. Fascism happens generally because people think they want it. And then, of course, they find out that they didn't. But there it is. And you know, again, it's not necessarily widely representative, but They're there. They're queuing up to support him, and they're pretty open about the fact that they want because when people talk about the country needs a paddling, which is an American phrase for corporal punishment of children, they don't mean themselves. They want other people to get knocked about a bit, roughed up, smashed up. And there it is. So anyone objecting to the use of the F word in the context of Donald Trump is complicit in, well, probably complicit in January the 6th, but certainly complicit in anything that happens next. A quick word, because a couple of people have asked. I won't pretend that millions have. I've got one more gig that's not sold out. I'm sold out in Nottingham on February the 3rd, but I'm on stage in Wolverhampton on Friday, February the 2nd at the Wolfram stage at the Halls in Wolverhampton. I'll tweet a link from my Twitter at Mr. James OB. But if you want to come along to that on February the 2nd, it would be lovely to see you. I'll be signing books as well. In the unlikely event that there are any unsigned copies of How They Broke Britain out there, I will be happy to sign them if you bring them along to the Halls, Wolverhampton, on February the 2nd. 12:56 is the time. Simon is in Southampton. I've already played Southampton. Simon, what would you like to say?
I was there.
Well, fantastic. What's going on with Trump?
Right. I was brought up with a sense of right and wrong, truth and false and everything else. And my head lately, the last few years, it's just been spinning. I cannot get my head around. Right. And it makes it even worse because I'm on the spectrum. So I find it very hard to take other people's points of view into account.
Yes.
At the best of times. And when I see what's happening, and I see like the people that you just have playing, the Americans that were just interviewed.
Yes.
I can't. I mean, this isn't real life, surely.
No, I'm the same sometimes. I really am. It is breathtaking, isn't it?
The example that I gave to your call handler when I phoned up was as far back as 9/11, on 9/11, and there's footage of him having a telephone interview on one of the news channels, and I think this is before news channels became bragging about, in one sentence saying how heartfelt and how disgusting and sympathies and everything else, just followed in the next sentence by then bragging that his building was now the tallest in New York.
God, you're right, aren't you?
And if that in itself wasn't a warning, I mean, it's just...
I think the reason it's so discombobulating is because it makes a mockery of everything that we do. That's why you opened by describing the difference between right and wrong, the difference between true and false. We need to believe that it matters. It's what keeps the chaos at bay. And yet someone who completely denigrates the distinction, someone who lies as easily as the rest of us breathe, to rise to the highest office in the world, that's why your head feels fried. Because mine does too sometimes. It seems to make a mockery of everything that you hold dear and everything that you believe in. What I find helpful is to spin it around and remind myself that that's why it's so important to keep calling it out. That's why it is so important to keep, however lonely it may be, Orwell. We used to talk a lot about Orwell during Trump's first term, about how if you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, then you will not go mad. So we can do that together. Thank you, Simon. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back to the whole show podcast on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. All LBC's shows are there, as well as the best video clips from LBC and other global stations. Pause and rewind live radio on Global Player, where you're always in control. Download for free from your app store or just go to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.